He opened the door and placed the bowl of soup. No invitation, no words. But it was the beginning of something no one saw coming. A girl, hands bound, a sign slapped across her chest reading "Too Wild," was dumped in the middle of a wind-blown street. Folks looked, then turned away. But one man did not, and his silent act that day rewrote the pages of decency in a land as brutal as the Wild West. There was no moon that night. Wind scraped across the rooftops of Boone Ridge like a handsaw against bone. A lone oil lamp swung from a wooden peg, casting flickers of yellow light onto the dirt porch. Mud-stained, littered with old boot prints and dry horse dung. From the front gate came hoofbeats, measured, steady, like a funeral drum. 4 men, long coats, sidearms holstered, eyes squinted from dust, or from being too used to not needing to say a damn word. The man in front tossed a rope to the ground. At the end of it, a girl, thin, dirty, hands tied behind her back. Dried blood marked her chin. Across her chest, a wooden board hung by wire. Too wild to be tamed. The lead man pulled a folded piece of paper from inside his coat and held it out to the figure who had just stepped out from the porch. An old man, wearing a sun-faded gray wool coat, one hand on a wooden cane, his left leg dragging like it had long ago forgotten how to carry its share. The man with the rope didn't bother introducing himself. He just spoke, like reciting a delivery order. "Got papers." Girl broke a preacher's arm. Escaped a Reformation camp. Caused public disorder. "We're here to take her." He emphasized her like he was spitting something rotten into the dirt. Caleb Boone didn't read the paper, didn't look at the girl either. His gaze merely swept over the scrawled handwriting, then stopped at the smudged, lopsided seal. His fingers trembled, not from fear, from fury, but Boone's rage didn't flare, it hardened, sat heavy in his chest like stone. "The mayor doesn't misspell his own name," he muttered almost to the wind. The lead man laughed. The rest joined in. One of them spat into the dirt. "This wrench is a dump, and you're a dump, old man. What are you sticking up for that little bitch for?" The girl didn't raise her head, still kneeling, hair hanging low, tied tight. No reaction, no tears. Caleb stepped slowly down the 3 porch steps. His boots met the earth like they were knocking on a grave. He walked to the girl, stopped. One hand stayed on his cane. With the other, he pulled out a small, worn folding knife. The group reached for their guns. Caleb didn't glance their way. He cut the rope at her wrists. One stroke, slow, steady, unshaken. She didn't look at him, but her shoulders fell, like a rope that had been pulled too long, finally released. Caleb turned toward the men. His voice wasn't loud, but it dropped onto the ground like a stone into a dry well. "She's got no one left, and I've got nothing left to lose. But if you mean to take her, you'll have to go through me." The wind shifted. The oil lamp swung wildly. Silence fell, thick as snow blanketing a mountain ridge. No one stepped forward. No one reached for a trigger. Only the youngest of the bunch, the one who had spat earlier, quietly reined in his horse. His eyes met Caleb's once. And in that brief exchange, his contempt cracked into confusion. He bowed his head, barely, as if shaking loose something he didn't understand. They all rode off, leaving the girl kneeling on the step, her hands still marked by the bite of the rope, blood beading along her wrist. Caleb stood there. He didn't comfort, he didn't ask, he didn't lecture. He simply stood, like an old statue carved to remind the world, not every wound needs to be dragged out into the dirt again. 3 months ago, morning came. Boone Ridge lay under a veil of silvery gray light, the kind that didn't warm, only made the dust more visible on weathered boards and an empty clothesline. Caleb stood at the porch steps, left hand holding an old tin cup, right hand slowly wiping dust from 2 wooden chairs placed side by side. One chair, the one he always sat in, The other, no one had ever touched. But every day he wiped it clean as if preparing it for someone who might come, or might never come. On the table between the two chairs stood a jar holding a brittle sprig of sagebrush. No one asked why he kept it there. No one was close enough to know. It was the kind his wife once grew, before she froze to death the year the snow came too early. Boone didn't keep her portrait. He held on to nothing too obvious. Only habits, the kind a man lives by when guilt makes him tidy. Out in the yard, the girl from the night before, Raya, sat in the shade near the horse pen. She didn't enter the house, didn't leave either, just sat there, knees pulled to her chest, eyes fixed on the ground. Not sad, not angry, not grateful, just there, like dry season grass that hasn't quite died, but doesn't care to grow again. Caleb didn't call her in, nor did he look at her longer than necessary. But when he poured warm water into the wash basin, he laid out an extra clean towel. When he stoked the fire, he added one more piece of wood. He didn't ask, "Are you hungry?" Didn't say, "You can stay." He just made things enough for two, as if that were always the right amount. Around midday, while leading his lame horse to the well, he saw Raya inside the chicken coop, shovel in hand. She hadn't asked. Didn't look back when he approached. She was scooping out old waste, piling it in a corner. Caleb didn't praise her. He only said, "The western heap's still full of rot." Heavier. Raya nodded slightly, still not meeting his eye. By late afternoon, a breeze stirred through the air. Caleb wiped the two chairs again. This time, as he prepared to sit, Raya stepped onto the porch. Her hands were dirty. Sweat marked the back of her shirt. A light scratch ran along her upper arm. She didn't ask to sit, but Caleb didn't take his seat either. He stood there for a moment, eyes resting on the two chairs, then quietly turned and stepped inside, leaving the door open behind him. Raya sat in the other chair. She didn't lean back, didn't sigh, just sat like someone about to leave, but not quite ready yet. Dusk fell. Two figures, one old, one young, one with a wooden cane, the other with rope marks still faint on her wrists, sat silently on two chairs no one ever imagined would be filled side by side. No words, no touch, only the clink of a wind chime chain tapping the rafters, like the tired breath of a house still standing. And down below, where the dust hadn't fully settled, a single damp footprint pressed into the third porch step. The first time another foot had ever stepped onto that porch, and Caleb didn't wipe it away. Caleb had a habit of leaving his door unlocked in the morning. Out west, a man who's lived alone long enough knows, if someone wants in, a lock won't stop them. He woke before the sky had lightened, prepared 2 bowls of oatmeal, lightly salted, no sugar. When he brought them to the porch, the chair on the left was empty. No damp footprints, no sound. Caleb ate alone, as he had for the past 10 years. He didn't look around, didn't call out. A man like him didn't resent those who left. He just waited a little longer to see if they might come back. But as he stepped into the yard, he noticed a pile of stones neatly stacked beside the goat pen. Each rock about fist-sized, carefully chosen and arranged in a straight line. No one at the ranch had done that in years. No one had asked. It was just someone choosing the hardest job to justify staying. Inside the chicken coop, Raya was crouched, back resting against the wooden wall, hands red and swollen, untreated. Beside her sat an old burlap sack filled with broken, jagged stones. She looked up when Caleb appeared. No smile, no nod. She simply said, "I'm not going anywhere, but if you want, I'll move out of the chicken coop." Caleb studied the girl. Her chest rose and fell with fatigue. A small cut ran along her collarbone, the blood already dry. He didn't ask who hurt her, didn't ask why she was hauling stones and stacking them. He just said slowly, "There's still rock out east." "More snakes out that way?" Raya narrowed her eyes, not in fear, not defiance. She simply looked at him, longer than usual, then nodded. At noon, the sun burned like fire. Raya headed east, dragging the torn sack behind her. Caleb stayed with the lame horse, kept working on the broken pen latch, but every now and then his eyes lifted toward the stony slope where dust swirled in silence. She didn't return by afternoon. Not until dusk crept close did he see her silhouette come down the ridge. Shoulders scraped, lips cracked, no rocks in her hand. Only a broken branch, dry and twisted, for no clear reason. He was already sitting on the porch steps. The chair on the left was empty again, but this time he stood up before she reached him, said nothing, walked into the house, set a basin of warm water on the table, then went around back. When he returned, the girl had her hands soaking in the basin. Her fingers moved shyly, like a child's, but her eyes, they were hollow like the land she'd once been cast out from. Beside the basin sat a dry biscuit, split in half, one piece left behind. No one spoke. No one looked at the other. Only the basin, used twice, and a shared crust of bread, passed without a glance. On the porch step, her footprint appeared again, this time deeper and dry. Thursday morning, dust swirled on the horizon like a herd of stray cattle. Caleb stood by the barn door, one hand gripping the wind flap made from hide. Raya sat behind the cypress tree, rinsing wild cilantro she'd just foraged. The smell of sweat, earth, and something else, something quieter, blended into one. Hoofbeats echoed, not hurried but knowing. Raya held her breath. She recognized that sound. A hollow-bellied horse ridden hard, fed little, never stopped for grazing. She stood. Her face went pale. Caleb cast a quick glance her way, no more than a flick, then stepped out onto the porch. A woman appeared at the top of the rise, riding a silver-gray horse. Her leather shirt was torn at the collar, her sandy hair tinged red from desert dust. Her eyes narrowed, not from sun, but from contempt. "Mr. Caleb Warren, I hear you're feeding some shameless little bastard like it's a favor to the Lord." Raya stepped back, hands still wet, trembling, but Caleb didn't move. He spat out a dry stalk from between his teeth, tossed it to the dirt, and said nothing. The woman swung down from her horse. She walked with swagger, a coiled snake tattoo wrapping her bicep. "That girl, she made my brother leave his wife, his house, his name, and now she's buttering up old loners for scraps?" Raya stayed still. No denial, no retort, only her eyes, red, and her teeth clenched tight on her lower lip. Caleb stepped forward, gently, like walking on snow. "You done talking?" The woman raised a brow. "I'll be back, and you best drag that thing to the roadside before someone else does it for you." The dust of her horse rose again, then dissolved. In the wind lingered the scent of gun oil and scorched cotton. Caleb didn't turn to look at Raya, but his voice cut through the air, as if meant for the wind itself. "If you're afraid, then leave. If you stay, tomorrow we stack more stone." That night, Raya didn't come to the porch. She curled up in the old goat shed, lying in straw, untouched food beside her, but she didn't cry. She just kept her eyes open, watching the oil lamp sway with the wind. Caleb didn't sleep either. He sat at the old wooden table, sharpening the meat knife, stroke by slow stroke. On the tabletop, he etched a new tally mark beside 5 old ones. The morning after the old wind. Caleb reached the barn earlier than usual. Raya wasn't there. The goats hadn't been fed. A basket of eggs was still untouched. On the stone near the pine tree there were tiny, muddy footprints. He stepped back inside, set the kettle on the stove, and opened the window facing the low ridge. Raya was out back, sitting in the patch of dry dirt behind the house, where no garden had ever taken root. Around her sat 3 of the Wilson kids, dusty, bare-kneed, cross-legged in the dirt, watching her slice an onion into flower shapes. Caleb furrowed his brow. Since when did children show up here without being called? Raya hadn't seen him. She was busy skimming foam from a pot of boiling water with a spoon that had a broken handle. The youngest child was scratching his behind with a wooden ladle. "Did you get in a fight yesterday, sis?" "No." "Did it hurt?" "Yeah." "Hey, sis, they say you used to swallow fire. Is it true?" She let out a dry laugh, but didn't answer. Caleb stayed behind the window. From here, she didn't look like the girl folks had called too wild. She looked more like a poor older sister teaching her little siblings how to use old spoons, how to salt boiling water, and calling each of them by native names, just to make them laugh. By midday, Caleb came out carrying an old wooden plank, propped it up to make a small table. He didn't say a word, only set down a clean tin cup. Raya nodded. She ladled him a portion of soup, only vegetables and salt, but it was the only bowl that came with half a cornbread biscuit. "If you don't eat it, the kids will." "I'll eat," he replied. No other words were exchanged. After the meal, the children left on their own. No noise, no begging. The littlest one hugged the broken spoon like it was treasure. Raya stayed to wash the pot in a chipped wooden basin. Her hands were scratched raw, her eyes still slightly swollen from the night before. Caleb watched from a distance, didn't approach, but from his coat pocket he pulled out a small pale blue pouch, an anti-swelling salve he'd bought last month for a goat with joint rot. He set it on the windowsill, then headed straight to the barn, without a word. The afternoon waned slowly. On the ridge, sunlight lingered in golden streaks like flaxseed oil. Caleb found himself thinking about the broken spoon, not because it was lost, but because that soup tasted like something close to home. That night, the wind changed direction, not a violent wind, but the kind that carries ill intent. In the horse stall, the animals sneezed over and over, as if they sensed something strange in the air. Caleb latched the barn doors, made a slow round along the fence line. Raya didn't come out that night like she usually did. She was in the kitchen tending a small fire, roasting cornbread. For the first time, he saw her holding a knife not for defense, just to scrape burnt husks off the corn. He didn't speak, but he watched longer than usual. Raya said nothing, and didn't ask why. No one knew. On the back steps, there was a single damp footprint. Someone had stood there, then slipped away into the dark. Midnight. The scent of smoke reached Caleb's room before the crackle of flame. He jumped up, opened the back door, and saw the chicken coop ablaze. The fire wasn't large yet, but enough to send the hens into a frenzy, flapping, screaming. He ran toward it, beat at the flames with a wet blanket. In silence. No shouting, no calling for help. He'd lived long enough to know. This wasn't an accident. Chickens don't light fires, and the footprints by the back fence didn't belong to anyone from the house. When he returned to the porch, Raya was already there. Hair a mess, knife still in her hand, asai, the one she used to shave corn. "I didn't do it." Caleb didn't answer. He looked her square in the eye, and under the flickering glow of dying flames, her gaze wasn't pleading, just steady. "I know," he said, no more words. He stepped inside the house, retrieved a dust-covered rifle, and set it down by the front door. Raya stood there for 10 full minutes, didn't go in, didn't walk away. Then she returned to the kitchen, took a cloth, and quietly wiped each spoon clean. The next morning, when Caleb checked the fence out back, he found a straw hat trampled into the dirt. Old. It belonged to someone he'd once thrown out of a saloon for hitting his wife. Inside it, a half-burned scrap of paper. That wild bitch still living there? Caleb crushed the note in his fist. tossed it into the ash pit. Said nothing to Raya, but that night he didn't lock his door. Instead, he slept by it, hand resting on his rifle. Raya collapsed the next morning, not the kind of collapse from exhaustion, but something quieter, as if her body had finally refused to try anymore. She crumpled beside the kitchen steps, still holding half an onion, mid-slice. Caleb didn't call her name. He knelt down, reached out, but didn't touch, just looked at her, then fetched the blanket from the chair, laid it over her, and lifted her inside. No one knew how long it had been since anyone carried her. She didn't resist, only breathed in short bursts, her eyes unable to fully open. He laid her down on his wife's old bed. No scent of soap, no flowers, just a place, with a pillow, a quilt, and someone who didn't ask questions. 3 days passed. The fever held on. Caleb didn't know what to do. He had doctored calves, set broken horse legs, even once saved a rabid dog. But no one had ever taught him how to care for a girl the whole town had branded wild. By the 4th day, she started talking in her sleep, not cries or screams, but soft, broken whispers, like calling out to someone who had long since left. Don't leave me. No, I didn't take the money. My hands are clean." Caleb sat still through the night, listening, and remembering the girl he once defied his father to marry, the same woman who walked away years ago, because he didn't know how to say the right kindness when it mattered most. Raya never told him anything. Only on the 5th evening, when the fever broke, she opened her eyes, faint and unfocused, and saw the veined, rough hand resting on her forehead. "You made it," he said, his eyes still staring at some place far beyond the room. "It won't be easy," he added. Raya didn't respond. She only shifted slightly toward the last trace of light at the foot of the bed. And for the first time since she'd arrived, she whispered loud enough for Caleb to hear, without him needing to ask, "I'm sorry for not knowing who to trust." He didn't turn to look at her, just gave a slow nod. "Trustin' or not, that's yours to decide. But if you mean to keep living, someone's got to be willing to stand nearby." That night, he didn't lock his bedroom door, not because he wasn't afraid anymore, but because he knew. If the girl chose to leave, he couldn't and shouldn't stop her. June came to Gully's Notch by way of rain. No thunder, just the hush of soft drops, falling steady on rusted tin roofing like someone breathing in their sleep. Caleb sat in the old wooden chair. The other one, the chair he'd never gotten around to tossing out, was now occupied. Raya, her head rested against her arm, hair damp from the rain because she had run outside too quickly when the sky began to turn gray. "In town," she said after nearly half an hour of silence. "No one ever let me sit without asking something." Caleb lifted his tin cup of coffee, no warmth left, no cream. He took a sip, then nodded, as if agreeing with something that had been said in the language of people used to being judged. "People don't like what they can't name," he said. Raya looked out toward the valley, where the cedar trees stood like pillars holding up the sky, where no one was near enough to call her wild. "I wasn't a good girl," she admitted, "but I wasn't what they said either." Caleb didn't ask, "Then what are you?" He just looked at the sky, as if wondering whether this land had enough room for those who were never forgiven. Suddenly the sound of hoofbeats echoed from a distance, off rhythm. Someone was coming, but not by the main trail. Caleb stood. His eyes changed, from the kind that watched the rain fall to the kind that remembered the scent of danger. "Go inside," he said. "Don't stand by the window." Raya looked at him for a moment, didn't argue, didn't ask. She just stepped inside, the way someone does when somewhere deep down, they've been taught that trusting someone is the first step toward changing everything. Caleb stepped off the porch, his hand brushing the handle of the old sledgehammer hanging beneath the eaves. He wasn't as quick as he once was, but his heart still knew the rhythm of a storm changing course. The rain kept falling, and in that silence a confrontation was quietly making its way toward the house that once believed no one would ever sit beside it again. He rode a gray horse, front leg hitching slightly, sliding quick through the wet mud like he'd done this 100 times before. Caleb stood still. It was raining, but the man wore no coat. Only a faded shirt, collar open, exposing tattoos that sprawled like a map of all the days this land had chewed up and swallowed. He had once been a stable boy, left behind when the gold mine dried up, now surviving by hunting down others like himself. He didn't dismount right away, just raised his eyes through the rain, gazing toward the window of the wooden house. "I smell it," he said, grinning. "That stink no one can stomach but me." Caleb didn't move. One hand rested on the handle of the old sledgehammer. "You're off trail," Caleb said, voice gravel rough. "I'm looking for someone," the man replied. Dark hair, golden eyes, used to sleep with a knife, like to climb rooftops. "I knew her long before you did, old man." Inside the house, Raya hid behind the curtain. Her face went pale, not from fear of him, but from memory, from the days she'd been dragged through the underground markets, bought and sold again. His name was Dean Blaker, the man who had once bought her only to sell her off again. She'd been returned, too wild, cost him a sale. He still laughed about it like it was just a bad trade gone sour. "I don't need to keep her," he said, his eyes grazing the windowsill. "I just want back what she owes me, a face no one would pay for." Caleb stepped forward, didn't raise his voice, didn't reach for a weapon, just looked, with the kind of stare that held something deeper than justice, a line no man was allowed to cross. "She owes you nothing," he said, "but if you think otherwise, you're standing on the wrong ground." Dean clicked his tongue, spat in the dirt. "What ground don't come with a price, old man? The mine quit me. I'll dig profit out to something else. Next time I come, I don't knock." He turned his horse, leaving deep hoofprints in the soft earth, and the stench of wet leather and cheap smoke, a stain that wouldn't scrub out. Raya came outside as the hoofbeats faded. She said nothing, just looked at Caleb, not with defiance anymore, but as if asking, "Why would you do this for me?" Caleb didn't look at her, just shrugged off his coat, hung the sledgehammer back on the old hook, and stepped inside. "Go dry off. Wet clothes hang from the rafters. This porch won't hold if both of us catch cold." And for the first time, Raya smiled, not a smile of triumph, but the kind of smile you wear when you don't quite know whether to laugh or cry. The morning was cold. Dry wind lashed the nape of the neck, not the sting of snow, but a cold that scraped like sandpaper. Raya was up early. For the first time, she swept the yard. No one asked her to. Caleb sat behind the window frame, sharpening an old hunting knife. The blade hissed against the whetstone, steady and soft, like misting rain. Patient, unhurried. He didn't ask why she was doing the work. He wasn't surprised she didn't argue, didn't bolt, didn't look at him like a threat. It was only when she knelt to light the stove, pulling her hair up, that he saw it. The morning light slid across her neck and revealed it, a long, thin scar, winding like a sand viper, running from beneath her hairline down across her shoulder blade. She had once been dragged by the hair, pinned to the cold wooden floor of a Reformation camp, because she had knocked a guard off his feet to shield another girl from the lash. Too wild, they'd called her, when she bit the man's hand just to hold on to a sliver of justice. Caleb didn't ask, didn't stare, He rose without a word, went inside. A while later he returned carrying a strip of soft cloth, a bottle of herbal salve, and the knife he'd just finished sharpening. "Let me see your collar," he said, his voice even, like telling a horse to lift its hoof when a thorn was stuck. Raya paused. She looked at him, trying to see if he was joking or testing her. Caleb's gaze didn't waver. "Just disinfectin', no touchin'," he said. "Old wounds like that need softening up. Leave 'em be too long, they'll tug on your spine come winter and steal your sleep." She offered her shoulder. His hands were warm, rough, calloused, but didn't shake, didn't linger too long in one place. No words passed between them, only the sound of hooves somewhere in the distance and wind slipping through the wood gaps. She didn't turn to look at him, but her eyes burned, not from wind. She remembered that night, the guard who laughed as he left that scar. No one had asked if she was hurt. No one had bandaged her. Not then, not ever. But now, someone had. When he was done, Caleb handed her the hunting knife. "Keep it," he said. "Everybody needs something for protection. Just don't let it be the thing that tells you who you are." She took it. It felt heavy, not from steel, but from the weight of a truth she'd never known. Someone had touched her wound and didn't make it her fault. She stepped outside. The wind was still there, but from that moment on she walked straighter. Night fell quicker than usual. The wind blew in from the wrong direction. Its taste was off, not the clean bite of Highland wind, but something acrid. Smoke, character, and something else, like sweat that dried days ago. Caleb split wood in silence. Raya tended the fire near the horse stall, just as he'd shown her days before. Keep the flames low, else the light might betray you. Neither of them said it aloud, but both could feel it. Something wasn't right. The horses didn't sleep. The dog howled twice in 10 minutes, but it didn't bark. When Caleb laid his hand on the Winchester above the stove, Raya said nothing. She already had her knife in hand. The one he gave her, its worn handle still bearing the faint imprint of her grip. He motioned for her to kill the fire. She obeyed. Swift, sure, like someone who's fled into darkness before. They moved behind the cattle shed, where a stone wall and dead brush formed a blind spot. Moonlight pushed through the clouds, silvering the land just enough to reveal a figure crouched low beyond the fence. 100 paces out. Not a local, not a native, not anyone who belonged to this land. Caleb didn't squeeze the trigger. He waited, but Raya didn't. She whispered, "He wore cleats like that last time." Left prints behind the horse stall. "I saw them this morning." Caleb glanced her way, just one nod. No words. He understood. This wasn't about him anymore. This was her circle, and for the first time, he was standing inside it. The shadow crept closer to the horses. Caleb crawled forward, fingers tight on the rifle stock. Raya stayed behind, tucked in the dark, blade drawn, eyes fixed. When the man reached to unfasten the wooden latch, Caleb rose. "One more step and I shoot, and I don't shoot to warn." His voice was low, cooler than rusted iron. Didn't need to shout. The man froze, but didn't back off. Instead, he looked Caleb dead in the eye and sneered. "She's just some stray girl, not worth it. Keep her close and one day she'll slit your throat in your sleep." Raya stepped forward, out of the shadows. The man turned. His eyes changed, not out of fear, but surprise. That girl didn't run, didn't kneel. "He taught me how to hold a knife," she said. "But I already knew how to use it. The only difference now is I don't need it to run." Caleb never had to fire. The man let out a single laugh, the sound of someone who knew there wouldn't be a second chance. Then he left. Slowly. Never looked back. When the horses' hoofbeats faded behind the ridge, Caleb turned to Raya. There'll be 3 more, if I guessed right. I know, she said. It was the first time she called him that. Umbit, like kin. And for the first time since she'd arrived, she didn't sleep alone. Caleb sat in a chair, back against the wall, rifle across his lap. Raya lay near the fire, knife beneath her pillow. Neither of them slept, but neither of them was afraid anymore. The next morning the sky held no rain, but the wind had shifted. Caleb rose earlier than usual. He didn't brew coffee, didn't check the chicken coop like he did every day. Instead, he walked straight to the old horse stable on the eastern slope, the one long shut. The hinges groaned as he pulled open the door. A bird that had made its nest in the feed trough shot out, leaving behind a few swaying strands of straw. Raya followed in silence, standing a short distance away. She didn't call to him, didn't ask, just watched. Caleb picked up a stiff broom and began sweeping the rotted floorboards. Slow, steady, careful, like someone brushing dust from the surface of memory. This stall, he said after a while, eyes still on the ground, was his. The boy liked walking the horse around in circles. That was all. Raya understood. No more words were needed. She didn't say, "I'm sorry," didn't ask, "Who did you lose?" She simply stepped forward, bent down, picked up the stone that once held the door open, and set it back where it belonged. A small gesture, but it was the first time he let her step into something that had once been his. By noon, Caleb lit a small fire inside the stable. They roasted flatbread and 2 potatoes over the coals. They ate in silence, no mention of the night before, no talk of the boy. None was needed. After the meal, Caleb brought out an old saddle, so caked in dust the leather was no longer visible. Raya looked at it the way one might look at something sacred. Caleb didn't explain. He only said, "If they come back tomorrow, you take this saddle. You ride the spotted mare. Don't take the main trail. Ride against the wind." Raya nodded. "And you?" "I stay. Got things still unfinished." Wind crept through the gaps in the wood, carrying the scent of rot and rust, but Raya didn't feel cold. She looked at him, the man who once said nothing, once seemed cruel, once looked at her like she wasn't worth keeping, now silent in another way, the silence of a man who had lost and now meant to protect. That afternoon they repaired the stable doors, fastened new bolts, wove fresh wire across the fencing. No one said, "We're preparing for a fight." But everything pointed toward it. Raya brought the saddle into the house. She cleaned it inch by inch, as if scrubbing someone else's memory with the same hands the world once deemed unworthy of holding anything at all. As night fell, she lit the fire. Caleb sat in stillness, his fingers tracing the stitching on the rifle's stock. They didn't speak it, but both knew. Tomorrow night would not be like the others. The moon was full, not a single cloud. Gully's notch lay bare beneath the light, the kind of light that asked nothing of the good and left the wicked nowhere to hide. 3 figures appeared at the edge of the bluff. They didn't rush, didn't speak, just stood there as if Caleb's waiting had called them forth. Raya was asleep in the stall, the saddle beside her, a pack of food, a water pouch, a hand-drawn map, everything Caleb had prepared without a word of farewell. He sat in the wooden chair at the doorway, rifle laid across his lap, a glass of water beside him, no whiskey. As the 3 men drew closer, torchlight revealed them, the bald one leather coat, a short blade hanging loose at the hip. The tall, thin one, smile crooked like everything was a game. And the third, the one who had once sold Raya at that cursed underground market. "I'm not reselling," Caleb said. His voice was mountain stone, neither raised nor shaken. "I don't keep prisoners, but I won't let anyone be dragged off like livestock." The bald one stepped forward. eyes flicking toward the rifle. Old rancher, don't die for discarded goods. Caleb looked at him, then turned his gaze toward the horse stall, where an oil lamp flickered faintly. You're wrong about one thing. I ain't dying for anyone. But tonight I live to protect something nobody else thought worth keeping. The tall man chuckled. His hand slipped behind his back. But just as metal glinted, bang! The first shot wasn't meant to kill. The bullet struck the porch beam, snapping the leather whip before it left his hand. Silence. The third man stepped back. The bald one spat on the ground. This time, you've got a gun. Next time, you won't have anyone left to protect. He turned his back, and the three of them disappeared into the dark as if they'd never been there. Caleb stood a long time. He didn't follow, didn't speak. His hand trembled, but the rifle never dropped. When he entered the stall, Raya was already awake. She didn't ask, didn't cry. She simply rose, took the saddle from the hook, and set it back down. I'm not leaving, she said, barely louder than breath. Not letting you be alone, whether this is the last night or the first. Caleb looked at her, really looked, not as some wild girl, not as a burden, but as someone who chose to stay when leaving would have been easier. He nodded, didn't hug her, didn't thank her. He just pulled an old rifle from the rafters and set it down on the hay-strewn table. Then, tomorrow, we fix the fence. They said nothing more about what had happened, but the oil lamp burned almost till dawn. The light of a night where two lonely souls stood beside each other, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Gully's Notch, 2 months later. The wind had changed seasons. Morning mist clung thick to old wooden boards. The dust road no one used now bore new footprints, lighter, smaller, but always walking beside another. Caleb still drank water instead of coffee, still sat on the porch each morning in his old chair. But now there were 2 chairs. The second, Raya had built herself from leftover stall planks. No one invited her to sit. She didn't need to ask. One morning she simply brought it out, placed it beside him, and sat. They didn't talk much. Didn't need to. Just listened to the wind, watched the chickens pass, and somehow always knew who'd let the cows out first that day. Sometimes he'd reach over and drape a cloak across her chair when the wind turned sharp. Sometimes she'd place a warm bowl of porridge on the step as she passed, without a word. Neighbors from far-off homesteads began to stop by again, trading sacks of potatoes for strips of dried venison. No one asked who she was. She didn't answer. And Caleb, simply by not correcting them, told them what mattered. One morning, a little black girl, maybe 7 years old, stood at the gate, eyes wide, clutching a bundle of cloth. I heard there's a place here where no one gets turned away, she said, voice trembling. Caleb moved to step forward, but Raya stepped first. She crouched down, looked the girl in the eye, as if seeing her own younger self. Come in, she said gently. How about we start with breakfast? Caleb didn't interrupt. He just quietly brought out a third wooden chair. Weeks later, people noticed. A small ranch that didn't look quite so weathered anymore. A girl no longer called too wild. An old man who no longer poured water only for himself, but always poured a cup first, for someone else to drink. There was no wedding, no declarations of love, no one wept. There was only a place where those misjudged could stay, live as they truly were, and be seen through gentler eyes. A place, they say, where new Wild West stories had begun.